God versus Nature, the conflict between religion and science in history. Chapter 4, Reason as the existence-oriented faculty. As we saw in Chapter 1, central to all science is the use of reason, the faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses. The validity of science relies on the validity of reason. A full validation of reason lies beyond the scope of this book, but it is necessary here to identify several fundamental ideas that are at the base of reason and all our knowledge, even if they are rarely identified explicitly. The following sections form the most abstract part of this book, but they are critical for illuminating the chapters that follow. Are any truths self-evident? The idea of self-evident truths is not popular among today's intellectuals. In the past, many thinkers have claimed to find self-evident truths that were anything but. Descartes claimed any idea that was clear and distinct to be, by that fact alone, true. Many theists have argued that the existence of God is self-evident. Many thinkers have claimed that certain ethical ideas, such as the goodness of altruism, are self-evident. However, none of the above ideas comes close to qualifying as truly self-evident. If there are no self-evident truths to serve as starting points for our knowledge, as most modern philosophers hold, then our knowledge becomes a structure built on quicksand, and any hope of finding certainty on any issue is lost. Any hope we have of defending science is also lost, and, like philosopher Paul Feyerabend, we will have no basis on which to prefer modern science over voodoo. Axioms of Philosophy. In light of the critical need to ground our knowledge on a sound foundation, I ask the reader to set aside any pre-existing aversion he may have toward the idea of self-evident truths, and to carefully consider the following presentation of axioms as identified by philosopher and author Ayn Rand. At the base of philosophy and all our knowledge are three ideas that are so basic and irreducible that Rand called them axioms. The first of these is the concept of existence. Quote, "The first point to be made is existence exists. A rational philosophy starts with the most fundamental point. Looking out at the world, at any aspect of it, in this case at a computer, we say, this is. Looking out the window at the trees, buildings, and automobiles in the distance, we say, these things are. Something exists." Unquote. The fact of existence is not only self-evident, it is an irreducible starting point of all cognition. Quote, "Prior to any subsequent question, before one can even seek to identify what kinds of things there are, before any further learning takes place, there must first be something to be learned, and one must know this basic fact. If not, there is nothing to consider or to know." Unquote. Note that this is not the same thing as the idea that a physical world exists. The concept existence does not indicate what kind of things exist. It merely stresses the primary fact that they exist. The next axiom is the fact that we have the faculty of consciousness. Quote, "Existence exists, and the act of grasping that statement implies two corollary axioms: that something exists which one perceives, and that one exists possessing consciousness, consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists." Unquote. Of course, a world without consciousness is possible, but in order for you to be aware of that world, You must be conscious. In fact, awareness is simply another word for consciousness. The third fundamental axiom is the law of identity. Quote, this principle states that a thing is what it is and is not what it is not. Symbolically, A is A, and it is not non-A. For any existent, to be is to be something. Unquote. As Rand points out, quote, the concept identity does not indicate the particular natures of the existence it subsumes. It merely underscores the primary fact that they are what they are. Unquote. Instead of saying existence has identity, it is more accurate to say existence is identity. To be is to be something specific. An important idea that follows directly from the above axioms is the law of causality, which states that the identity of an entity makes it act in a specific way. An entity's identity is the cause of its actions. The order, lawfulness, and regularity we see in the world comes from the fact of causality, which is inherent in reality as such. To be is to be something, and thereby to act accordingly. The primacy of existence versus the primacy of consciousness. The axioms of existence and consciousness have a natural order. Existence comes first, then consciousness. Rand called this fact the primacy of existence. Quote, existence, this principle declares, comes first. Things are what they are independent of consciousness, of anyone's perceptions, images, ideas, feelings. Consciousness, by contrast, is a dependent. Its function is not to create or control existence, but to be a spectator, to look out, to perceive, to grasp that which is. Unquote. The opposite of this principle is the primacy of consciousness, the idea that consciousness creates reality. Imagine a primitive farmer who desperately wishes for rain for his crops. He stands in his field, turns toward the sky, closes his eyes, starts chanting magic incantations, and imagines rain falling. He is operating on the premise that his consciousness controls existence. The primacy of existence mentality, on the other hand, would recognize that wishes don't directly control reality, that the weather is what it is, and that there may be other relevant facts that he can identify, perhaps about other sources of water and how he can make use of them. The primacy of consciousness comes in three main variants, depending on whose consciousness is seen as creating reality. There is the personal form, in which one's own mind creates reality. There is the divine form, in which God creates reality. And finally, there is the social form, in which a society's collective mind, or a majority vote, creates reality. Looking back at the last two chapters, we can detect these philosophic views among various thinkers in ancient Greece and the Dark Ages. Plato's philosophy was based on the primacy of consciousness. Plato's forms were, in essence, mental objects, aspects of consciousness. The Neoplatonists, and later Augustine, held that the forms are ideas in the mind of God. Moreover, per Plotinus, the world we live in is the lowest level of being. It is merely an emanation from mystical consciousness, the world soul, the world mind, and God. In contrast, Aristotle's philosophy was implicitly based on the primacy of existence. For Aristotle, reality was not Plato's mental mystical forms, but the individual objects we see around us. For Aristotle, these things exist. They are what they are, independent of anyone's awareness of them. The ancient Greeks created science, and they could not have done so within a fundamentally religious culture. Essential for the creation of science was a particular view of the nature of reality, a certain metaphysics that accepts the primacy of existence. Christianity, from its very beginning, with its God-centered view of the world, had the primacy of consciousness, of God's consciousness, as its philosophic fundamental. Are these axioms falsifiable? In the above sections, readers familiar with the ideas of philosopher Karl Popper may be prompted to ask, but are these axioms falsifiable? Popper originated the idea of falsifiability as a way of demarcating between scientific claims and pseudoscientific or meaningless claims. A falsifiable claim, according to Popper, is one that can be put to the test of observation, and for which it is conceivable that a disproving observation could be made. For example, the claim that all swans are white would be disproven by the observation of a black swan. Popper held that good science involves the creation of broad, falsifiable claims, followed by systematic attempts to falsify them. In proposing this idea, he was motivated by the reasonable concern to exclude from science those hypotheses that could never be tested. The axioms of existence, consciousness, and identity are clearly not falsifiable, since there are no conceivable observations which could prove them wrong. So, are these ideas pseudoscientific or meaningless? Not at all. As we saw, these philosophic axioms are preconditions of science and all rational thought. Denying any of them leads to an absurdity. Suppose that someone tries to deny the axiom of existence. He says, "Nothing exists." Then, by the logic of his own statement, he doesn't exist, and his statement doesn't exist. Suppose he tries to deny that consciousness exists. He says, "Nobody is conscious." Then, by the logic of his own statement, he has emitted a meaningless sequence of sounds to an audience that is not aware of them. Suppose he tries to deny the axiom of identity. He says, "Things are not what they are." Then his statement is not what it is. It is not even a denial. Clearly, it does not make sense to deny these axioms. But does it then make sense to affirm them? Yes, it does, especially when one is tempted to implicitly reject them. Consider a situation in which one has become aware of some painful facts. A woman discovers that her husband is having an affair. She can try to evade what she knows by excessive drinking or practicing other forms of denial, or she can say to herself, "This is a fact. I know what I know. It is what it is." And then she can take some action to deal with the situation more effectively. Science and religion as fundamentally opposite. In Chapter 1, we looked into the philosophic roots of science and religion to see that they are fundamentally in conflict. The clash is clear in both metaphysics and epistemology. In metaphysics, the clash is between the otherworldly view of religion and the this-worldly view of science. In epistemology, the clash is between faith and reason. Quote, "Faith is the essential that distinguishes religion from science. A scientist may believe in entities which he cannot observe, such as atoms or electrons, but he can do so only if he proves their existence logically, by inference from the things he does observe. A religious man, however, believes in some higher unseen power which he cannot observe and cannot logically prove." But we can now go to a deeper level of explanation than this. At the bottom is a clash about the axiomatic base of philosophy. The validity of faith relies on the primacy of consciousness. The validity of reason rests on the primacy of existence. This is the deepest root of the clash between science and religion. In the following chapters, as we examine more episodes in the history of science, we will see this philosophical clash continue to manifest itself, albeit sometimes in non-obvious ways.